Okay, we will move on to number 9.1. We're going to discuss a resolution. Board Member Hanson.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I move that the board adopt the resolution in support of Portrait of a Graduate. It's been posted to backup. And if I have a second, I'd like to speak to that.
You can if we get a second.
Second.
Second, Board Member Straight.
Yes.
Okay. So Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Thank you. If I can ask staff just to put the Portrait of a Graduate up on the screen for us, I think it's important to look at that as we talk. Thank you. The Utah Portrait of a Graduate has been in place since 2019. It's enjoyed universal acceptance and support by parents and educators until recently, and that's what's prompted this resolution. When I first came onto the board in 2019, I had the opportunity, along with several other current board members, to be part of the task force that created the Portrait of a Graduate. We recognize that getting an education means more than just academic mastery, and so we ask ourselves and a diverse group of stakeholders what characteristics a student needs to develop in order to succeed and lead in post-graduation life, no matter what path the student chooses, college, tech school, or direct to the workforce. The concept's not new. I looked at my second grade report card and I saw that I was evaluated for attitude, behavior, and citizenship. And I have to report that I wasn't exemplary in all of those. But at that time, I believed that evaluation was entirely subjective and up to the individual teachers, and we were all okay with that. We trusted our teachers' judgment. Kids interact with one another at school. In a lot of ways, it's their workplace and their community. Teachers and administrators direct their interactions in constructive ways. And the Portrait of a Graduate simply adds detail and consistency to our definitions of attitude, behavior, and citizenship, and provides guidance for the teachers to do that governing, give instruction. The characteristics of academic mastery, wellness, civic, financial, and economic literacy, digital literacy, communication, critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, collaboration and teamwork, honesty, integrity and responsibility, hard work and resilience, lifelong learning and personal growth, service and respect are all identified in the Portrait of a Graduate. And I would challenge detractors of the Portrait of a Graduate to identify even one of those characteristics that you wouldn't want your child to have. The Portrait of a Graduate encourages further parental involvement by advocating for development of local versions of the Portrait of a Graduate, and several of our LEAs have done that. The Portrait of a Graduate was developed and built up through a painstaking and transparent process over several years. It takes effort to create something good. It's much easier to attempt to tear things down. The Portrait of a Graduate is supportive of a transparent process, setting direction. It's supportive of parents, it's supportive of local control, and it's supportive of kids. In my opinion, the Portrait of a Graduate is some of the best work the board has done in years. If we can look at the resolution, please. Did I get that up on the screen?
That must mean it's coming. And can we make it a little bigger?
Might need to. And I will not read the entire resolution now. Many of the points that are in the resolution I've touched on. But I would like to just go down to the wherefore be it resolved part of the resolution, where the board would reaffirm its enthusiastic support for the process by which the Utah Portrait of a Graduate was developed, the value of the characteristics identifies, and the work of the USBE and all Utah educators to continue to use the Portrait of a Graduate as a foundation for our efforts to support parents in preparing our children to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. I hope that we as a board can get behind this. This Portrait of a Graduate document is a Utah document. It was developed in Utah by concerned Utahns to benefit Utah students. And it's my hope that it will go forward for many years in the future as a basis for our educational efforts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Hanson. So the motion before the board is that the board approves the resolution to support the portrait of a graduate. Discussion to that motion. Board Member Klein?
Yes, I would like to make a substitute motion.
Okay.
And that would be to adopt the resolution to revoke the portrait of a graduate. And I can speak to that if you'd like.
Okay, I'm going to have to just get a little clarity. Are you adding to or taking away from this motion?
What does the motion currently say? I can't say.
That the board approves the resolution to support the portrait of a graduate, the one that was up.
So I would amend that to say that the board, I make a motion that the board revoke the resolution, the portrait of a graduate resolution, or sorry, the portrait of a graduate, instead of adopting
so
this resolution supporting.
Okay, so you're against the resolution.
And I would like to propose the resolution to revoke the portrait of a graduate. Yes.
Give me more clarity. Natalie, help me here. You're
not sure how to say it. I'm not sure how to say it. But
I'm not either. So
I would like
motion
to.
Is, okay, that the board approves the resolution to support the portrait of a graduate. Is there something you want to add or take away from that motion? Are you amending? Tell me what
I would say that if could somebody put it up? Is it up on the screen somewhere? Then I can give you more.
Okay, because I'm just trying to follow. How do we amend?
Right. Is there a motion on the screen?
Motion.
Say that, somebody help me.
Is this a substitute motion?
This is a substitute motion.
Okay, you want a substitute motion, not an amend.
Yes, that's what I first said. Yes, I would like to substitute.
Okay, I'm just making sure, is that proper protocol? I'm just checking. Sybil, is that accurate? That's appropriate, correct?
Yes.
Yes, if she's substituting the current motion, that means that she would be replacing the current motion.
Okay.
With a new motion.
Okay. Yes.
Great, we've got it. Now
okay.
Okay, so the substitute motion would be
that the board adopt the resolution revoking the portrait of a graduate.
Do you have that? That's what you sent before?
Yes.
Can someone pull that up, please?
Staff should have it ready to pull up.
And we need a little bigger too.
So we're without a second on her substitute.
Okay, I just want to see it.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, the portrait of a graduate. Okay, so the motion, the substitute motion is that the board approve to revoke the portrait of a graduate. Is that
resolution.
accurate?
To approve the resolution to revoke the portrait of a graduate. Yes.
Okay, the resolution, then we're not. Okay. Okay, so the motion is that the board approve the board revoke the resolution on portrait of a graduate. Is that accurate?
That the board adopt the resolution to revoke portrait of a graduate.
Okay, thank you. All right, do we have a second to that? I don't see a second, so we're going to go back to the original motion. The motion that the board approves the resolution to support the portrait of a graduate. And we're having discussion on that. Board Member Straight?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I am supportive portrait of graduate. As I look back through my experience in local government, having a strategic plan that guides and directs the work of an organization is fundamental. Now, within the organizations I've worked, every once in a while, at least no more than every other year, we go back and we revisit our mission, our vision, all the different things that are a part of that. And sometimes we make amendments. It's an ongoing process. Strategic planning is an ongoing process. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that what we have now is 100% exactly what I would say as far as the Portrait of a Graduate goes, or personalized competency-based learning, or our mission, or our vision, or any of the different parts that work together to form our direction as an organization. But I support it. In fact, that was one of the things that excited me the most as a new member of the board. I'd actually went back a year previous, and from when I actually took on the board, and I'd read through this, and I was very pleased to see the direction of the board. Moving on. Different LEAs throughout the state are in different places regarding Portrait of a Graduate. However, as Board Member Moss mentioned earlier today, I was also at Mona Elementary and Juab Junior High. I also attended in an earlier session Timpanogos High School to look at what they were doing. And wow, what a great experience to see how one LEA took Portrait of a Graduate and adapted it to their situation. Portrait of a WASP, as was also mentioned earlier. But here's the biggest thing that I have to point out about Portrait of a Graduate. Portrait of a Graduate does not replace teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, or any of our other base. They work in combination with each other. They're supportive of one another. Board Member Hanson brought up his 2nd grade report card. I have my 6th grade report card that my mom saved for me, thank heavens. And they had two sides to this report card. One is scholarship, the other is citizenship. Under citizenship, health habits. Now this, you might laugh at this one. Breathes with mouth closed. Uses handkerchief. Keeps clothing, hands, face, and teeth clean. In fact, every morning when the lunch count was taken, and believe me, I went to a super small school in elementary. We had less than 50 kids. There were one teacher for every 2 grades. Imagine that. But all these things were a part. We would have to report whether our fingernails were underneath our fingernails were clean, if we brushed our teeth, different questions. Also have promptness, reliability, self-control, cooperation, courteous, courtesy, industry, and thrift. That's all part of my report card. Social emotional learning. At Mona Elementary, they had their SEL standard, and then they had their science standard in the kindergarten. It was at 1st grade. I can't remember, but it was one of those 2 grades, and they were working those together. I have a photograph of it, but I didn't download it, so I won't show that to you. But yeah, that's where we're at. Now, since Portrait of a Graduate came under attack, I think for political reasons, I wanted to go back and I wanted to talk to former board members, and some of them currently serve on the board, and I asked them about it. But also the person who I replaced, who was a great board member, who was very focused in on Portrait of a Graduate, she says, quote, Portrait of a Graduate was completely homegrown. Completely homegrown. It's Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. Just like when we have core standards, they're Utah core standards. People want to say, oh, we're back to about Common Core. No, these are our standards. We're going to work through those. Homegrown. Former board member Gravitt also said, we visited Weber State University and listened to recent high school graduates. This process happened all over the state. Real Utahns gave input. The public gave input. Educators and parents gave input. And those who were a part of the process, the primary sources, parents, business leaders, educators. Everyone was a part of this process. I take my hat off to the former board members that came before me in my limited capacity, who developed Portrait of a Graduate. Yeah, we've talked about this. There is going to be time, and there is going to be an opportunity to revise Portrait of a Graduate. But all in all, whole and whole, it is a wonderful document, and it doesn't replace teaching the basic skills that we're supposed to cover in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. Okay, as a reminder that the motion before the board is that the board approves the resolution to support the Portrait of a Graduate. So, Board Member Hymas.
Thank you. I first want the public, the board, to know I do support Portrait of a Graduate. However, I do have a difficult time with the resolution. I don't know. It looks odd to me to write a resolution to support our own document. The fact that we have the Portrait of a Graduate, that we're continuing with the Portrait of a Graduate, should speak for itself. We run into bumps in the road all the time. A resolution is not necessary for every hurdle that comes in front of us. I commend Scott for his work here and writing what he has. I think he makes some great points. In fact, if you scroll up just a little bit, right there, Utah's Portrait of a Graduate has gained. I would love to see that paragraph and the next one with recent attacks. If we put out a statement reaffirming our stance for Portrait of a Graduate, I think that's fantastic. But again, I'm not in favor of a full-on resolution for supporting our own document. So I will most likely vote no on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hymas. Board Member Lear.
Member Hymas makes a legitimate point, but I personally think because this has been under attack, because this has been challenged recently on social media in very specific, targeted ways, I do think it is important that the board speak up and say, yes, we still support this. It is a different board, as Scott points out. And I think that's an important reason. I've got to say, I was a late adopter to Portrait of a Graduate. I participated, but at first it seemed like a lot of jargon to me. What finally hit home to me was the point that a number of USBE staff members made, including Superintendent Dixon, who said that this, and she said it in a subtle way, this allows the staff to focus our work. Instead of having to respond to every legislator's random ideas for a bill, the staff members were able to bring the legislators back to Portrait of a Graduate and say, this is what the board wants to focus on. I think that's a really important element of this. I finally understood how important that was after the years and years of doing some of the same work myself. I also think it's important to note, and again, most of us will remember, this was a line-by-line discussion, a vote on line by line if we supported this. And there was near unanimous support for almost every line of this. So it was a very board-inclusive process, and it also included, as Brent pointed out, lots of regional meetings. Also, I have to say that it was interesting to listen to the public comment this morning, because almost every single, and then to listen to the discussion of the presidential scholars, there was not a lot of emphasis on content. It was emphasis on values. I could give you some quotes. Gail Ruzicka talked about civic and character education, shared values. Mr. Jonas talked about the American spirit, character of an American. There was discussion of loyalty and commitment. There was a discussion of engagement. When the presidential scholars talked about their teachers. They didn't emphasize the brilliance of their content knowledge. They emphasized their engagement with the students, their attendance, their personal commitment to the students, which is a little bit of an aside, but even these students recognize the importance of those skills. So I don't at all for a moment think we want to minimize the importance of academic skills and job-related skills. But what we've heard today and what we hear from employers constantly is graduates need what we have often called softer skills over and over. And so I think this document clarifies that, it brings it into focus, and it helps the staff focus their work on our behalf. I very much support this resolution.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Earl?
Thank you. I just have a few thoughts. The components of Portrait of a Graduate, I think almost everybody could get behind. The application of it is a little different. I think there are some criticisms out there, and those are criticisms we should probably be looking at. I think that a board that allows for that kind of dialogue to take place instead of shutting it down is important. Those may be valid or they may not be valid, but to have that kind of discussion is important. I will not be supporting this in the form it's in, while I support the contents of these things, except I do think we have to keep in mind a couple of things. As a board, that this is not a legal document. This in and of itself, or the Portrait of a Graduate, is it's almost a resolution in and of itself. It's not a legal mandate that any school applies it or uses it. There is no legislative mandate for it. So it's an idea, that type of a thing. Let's see where my other notes are. The other question I have is, can the Portrait of a Graduate itself stand up to criticism, or is it weak enough that it has to be continually sustained or pushed forward? If it is a document that's weak enough that it can't stand on its own, I think we might have some concerns with that. I do think that we need to look at this as a balanced issue, which things have more precedence and more balance within the Portrait of a Graduate, and which things are secondary. And what I mean by that is I've seen us break down components of the Portrait of a Graduate to try to define things that are really not definable. They are secondary characteristics of a culture or a community, and that those are things we want. And I think we lose some of that quality when we try to say honesty is these four things, or honesty is this, instead of expecting that honesty to take place within the academic environments. I just worry that we may be getting too far from the mission by spreading things out too far. And I just hope we can have continued dialogue and continued dialogue about the criticisms, so that we don't allow outside organizations, large organizations, to hijack the intent. And anyways, those are my thoughts at this point.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Board Member Norton?
Yes, I was not on the board in 2019 and did not get to vote in favor of this. And so this gives me an opportunity to publicly state my support for Portrait of a Graduate, and also through this resolution. Board Member Earl just said that this is an idea of what we hope for the future. And I also think it is an ideal. We've been talking about historical things up to this point, but as Board Member Lear said this morning, we got to see the future of our graduates when we saw those presidential scholars. And I was taking notes as they were discussing, as both the teacher and the student were discussing their pathway, and I heard words like balanced and extraordinary and nice. And I immediately thought of Portrait of a Graduate. I thought, here we have these four students who have such a deep academic mastery with the depth of knowledge, and yet we got to hear about their critical thinking, their collaboration, their service, their responsibility, the skills that they have developed in all settings. They are balanced young men and young women. And one of the comments in there is that they are extraordinary and they have extraordinary and impactful lives. And I thought that's what we want for our graduates. And these are the same skills and the same requirements and the same ideals that we put forth in Portrait of a Graduate. And I think it's a great plan for Utah students and a worthy goal that we should have for all of our graduates. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Norton. Board Member Moss?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. I know everybody's got their hand up. I shared my thoughts this morning about Portrait of a Graduate. I think it's a very positive thing. I enjoy seeing its application in the field, the way people do their own portrait of their local district or school. If this required a vote to keep it in effect, I would vote for it, but I'm going to abstain. I'll just explain why. I think this is teed up, as it says in the third full paragraph, as a response to political and factual argument and criticism of Portrait of a Graduate. I don't think this is the venue to resolve whatever criticism there might be, and I don't think it's necessary to vote yes to take on that political argument. So as much as I love and appreciate Portrait of a Graduate, I look forward to discussing it when we come up with our strategic plan. And I think we need to make sure we are not discouraging dissent or argument about our policies as much as I may like those policies. So for that reason, I can't vote against it because I don't want to vote against Portrait of a Graduate, but I can't vote for it because I think it's the wrong vehicle. And so I'm going to take the cop-out route and abstain, but it's for the principled reason that I don't think we should be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Moss. Board Member Booth?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Over the last 20 years, as a parent, as a grandparent, as an educator, I have chosen to spend a good chunk of my discretionary time on a school board. Because when I get together with my 10 grandchildren, I remember how precious these children are. As I see the children who don't have a voice, who don't have a parent, who don't have a support system, I want to be a part of a group of dedicated volunteers who will provide for those children what no one else is providing. The Portrait of a Graduate is, as it's been said earlier, truly homegrown. I haven't been reading about Portrait of a Graduate and all these Portrait of a Graduates across the country and all of the big companies that have been promoting this or that or the other. I've been living it. I was there at the turn of the century when P21, when 21st century skills were being developed by a group of educators in Arizona. I watched and went to meetings and year after year got more and more excited as I simultaneously traveled the world visiting 45 countries, analyzing and interacting with educational systems in those 45 countries, recognizing that we were really onto something besides the incredible need for mastery in content areas. There were these other more aspirational qualities and characteristics that have been identified beautifully in Portrait of a Graduate. I'm not voting, I'm not standing up and saying we've got to defend this. I'm just saying this is a natural outgrowth, natural development of good people coming together with parents. I think it's so interesting that the minute you get on the board, you're no longer a parent. The minute you become a legislator, you're no longer a parent. The minute you become an administrator in our public schools, you're no longer a parent. It's the parents against all of us bad people who are trying to do something horrible with their kids. This is just ridiculous. Recently, my mom passed away. She was lying in the hospital on the last day of her life. They were trying to feed all of these PICC lines and everything into her poor little body. She felt like a pincushion. She hadn't had one lucid moment for 6 weeks. She didn't even know who I was, but she turned to me in her last moment of lucidity and said, "Randy, this is ridiculous. They're killing me." And I think this is a moment where we need that moment of lucidity, where we need to understand that, yes, there's a lot of voices out there and there's a lot of concerns, and we share those concerns. But we are on the same team, and we are doing our very best, and have been doing for a long time, our very best to find. We don't have all the answers. We recognize that there will be changes coming down the pike, because we continue to listen and we continue to interact with those kids in the classroom day after day, and with those parents after school and in all other kinds of settings. I believe in what we're doing. I am totally and completely behind this. And I would just turn to someone like Superintendent Sid Dixon to hear from with an army of staff is interacting with the educators and the parents every day of their life in the agency. What does this document, what does this approach give them that makes their job easier or more productive? I really am grateful for the chance to be able to talk about this with all of you, because I highly regard you, and I have great feelings of gratitude for the privilege of working together for these kids that we love so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Booth. Board Member Hart.
So I support Portrait of a Graduate, but I don't need a resolution to do that. I feel like I would like to be known as somebody who lives and makes actionable decisions rather than relies on words. I think the whole conversation is taking up valuable time where we could move towards that ideal rather than repeating words. Every student that has come to me after they've left the school or when they feel they need to leave the school, every time it has been about an issue that is not about academics. It's about all these other factors. We talk a lot in our LEAs are having lots of conversation about the allocation of time, what we should be doing, that kind of thing. We are not helping them by creating resolutions supporting what we already support and reaffirming that. We reaffirm it through our actions. And I really do feel, and I know it's crazy, but I feel like there are forces at work. I don't know why, and I don't understand how it happens, but it seems that we're not able to move forward. And there are forces keeping us from moving forward. And this is a great example. We have so many things on our agenda, our things that we need to handle and decide and create and think through and revise. This is not one of them, because the way we reaffirm this is through our actions. I am exactly where, and I realize the irony of it, right? I'm taking more time to say that we spend too much time. I see the irony, but I'm where Jim is, and it's not a cowardly position for me. It is a conversation that I don't think should be continued. Now, I will talk to anybody about why I believe it isn't something that wasn't homegrown. I will have that conversation with anybody that wants to have it. I just am not going to spend more board time talking about something that we need to be acting on and modeling through our personal actions. So I will abstain. I'm not going to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Board Member Hart. Just a reminder that the motion before the board is the board approves the resolution to support the Portrait of a Graduate. Go ahead, Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Vice Chair Belknap. Well, I've been on the board a long time. I was off for a few years, and when I came on, one of the first places I landed was on the task force to create a portrait of a graduate. And we worked on that task force for 3 or 4 years. And I remember long, laborious meetings where we wordsmithed exactly what we wanted that document to say. So you can imagine my shock when I get an email saying that Portrait of a Graduate came from Ohio. What? What in the world? And suddenly all of this painstaking work that we did to create something of value for the school children of Utah was brought under condemnation and was attacked in a way that to me had no credibility. Of course, the public doesn't know what I know. The public wasn't in those task force meetings with me, but you know, this was something that was generated by the board that got input from many, many people that we did for the betterment of Utah school children. And so I feel rather resentful that it has been brought, I believe, unfairly under attack. And because of that attack, I think this resolution is necessary. And I wonder if we might be able, Chair, to hear from Superintendent Dixon as well on this before we go to a vote. But anyway, I am an enthusiastic supporter. I was a helpful creator, and I want the public to know that this is a Utah document created by people in Utah for Utah students. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Cannon. I'll hold on Dr. Dixon at this time, if that's okay. Board Member Hutchings, congratulations on the graduate today, and we're glad you're back with us.
Thank you so much. Glad I could be here. I was hoping I would get back for this discussion. And it was interesting. I wasn't here this morning because I was at my daughter's graduation, and that was an awesome mom moment. But it's interesting as I was sitting there listening to specifically the valedictorian and salutatorian speeches. I had the thought, and I've heard it said here before by a couple others before, that, you know, neither of them said they were really grateful for learning about quadratic equations or about, you know, the Civil War or any of that. And yes, school is about academics. It's important that they learn the state standards. But what did they talk about? The valedictorian and the salutatorian of this graduating class spoke about how important it was at their school that they learned hard work and resilience, that they learned to be lifelong learners, that they learned about service, and that they learned about responsibility. Those were the things that those high achieving students brought up because those were the things that they recognized of such great value. And those are the things that we find in the Portrait of a Graduate. I have found in my experience leading a school that yes, we can focus on academics and we need to, that's our main purpose there. But I have experienced schools where they are only looking at academics, and it's not the most healthy learning environment. When I work with my staff and I see schools that are focusing on some of the attributes and characteristics in a Portrait of a Graduate, you create clarity for the teachers of what to focus on in those areas. You create a focus for the students as far as what are some of the important characteristics and attributes that I need to learn to be successful in adulthood. And you also create a positive learning environment, which to me is really, really important. You create this environment where learning can thrive, when you see these attributes practiced at school. And through a portrait of a graduate, it's identified, it's clarified. You can use it as a school leader to say, this is what our focus should be in your classroom. And you can have rich discussions about it in professional development meetings, and you can have discussions about it with your students, because the Utah State Board of Education has stood up and said, this is important for Utah students. My last thing I want to say is I do have a concern about supporting Portrait of a Graduate, but voting against this resolution. And we've talked about, I'm not going to go over, it's been attacked. We need to respond. This is our document. We need to defend it. And this is our way of being able to defend it. If you vote against this resolution, the press, the public will be told that board members have voted against a Portrait of a Graduate. That may not be the intention of those who vote, of some of those who vote against it, but it will be what is publicly communicated, that members of the Utah State Board of Education do not support the Portrait of a Graduate. Those votes against this will be interpreted and it will be shared that way in some circles. And so I agree. I really appreciate what Member Hart said about reaffirming through our actions. And I completely agree with that. We need to model this in our schools. We need to model this in our circles. But the way that we can reaffirm Portrait of a Graduate right now, today, is by voting in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, Board Member Hutchings. Board Member Klein.
Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying that the many ideals that are listed in the Portrait of a Graduate, I think, are just that, ideals, such as honesty, integrity, responsibility, hard work, resilience, lifelong learning, personal growth, service, respect. All of those things are wonderful things, and so it's very hard to speak against those. But when you actually research all of the third-party organizations and special interest groups that are behind this, I mean, you've got Portraits of a Graduate that are being adopted or have been adopted throughout the country. And I know that we have lots of meetings here in Utah to try and personalize it and make it a Utah-based version, but it's the movements behind it and where they all, the end goal that they're all working towards. And that's what I've tried to bring up in my social media posts with all of the links so that people can do their own research, taking people to the sources of these organizations like Knowledge Works, like Workforce Development and CASEL and others. And so I have no objection to those ideals, but in how we actually incorporate those into our schools, or how we choose to hold schools accountable to teaching those, when those are ideas or things to be modeled more than taught, that's where the problem comes in. And I forwarded you some more information to your inboxes, information received or found through a grandma request that somebody shared with me. I think you'll find it very interesting. Our internal auditor at USBE, Debbie Davis, gives her take on the Portrait of a Graduate and how it aligns, or more accurately, doesn't align with the legislative mission and vision for Utah schools. And she specifically talks about how it is a stretch to try and conflate what is required in the legislation for Utah schools versus what the Portrait of a Graduate is trying to do, and the vision and mission statement that we have as part of our strategic plan. In the strategic plan, It literally talks about Portrait of a Graduate being the compass for a systems transformation in our public education system. And I just want to ask, what is this transformation? A complete systems transformation. What is that? I know, we talk about having these bold conversations and not holding back so that we can bring these things forward if we have a concern. That's what I've tried to do. Unfortunately, it's been seen as an attack, but these are concerns that I have that I would like to discuss and understand. Because if we're going to completely transform our entire education system, I think that needs to be brought out into the open, and we need to talk about what that is, who's behind it, what it's going to look like, so our parents and the citizens of Utah know where it is we're taking them, and we can actually get input to see if they're really okay with that, because this is a lot more than just these simple ideals that have been listed, and our efforts to try and take what is essentially a square peg in our vision mission statement, a Portrait of a Graduate, and force it into the round hole of the legislature's vision and mission statement, and trying to conflate the terms they use with the terms we use when they are not the same thing. And that's very clear in Debbie Davis's explanation entitled Internal Audit Brainstorming Questions about the USBE and potentially the legislature. I think you'll find those very interesting, along with another chart called Personalized Learning Coherence, where it ties all of the different elements together, not just Portrait of a Graduate, but how that is just the starting point. And then these concentric rings that get smaller and smaller until you get to, I guess, the outcome that we're looking for. And those different, that first ring is Portrait of a Graduate, and then getting smaller, each ring personalized competency-based framework, high quality instruction cycle, all leading to the P20 competencies, which are the Sustainable Development Goals aligned with the United Nations. And they're global competencies. If you read the literature, it's all there, as well as the Utah Core Standards and Social Emotional Learning based on CASEL's SEL framework. That's an actual USBE document that was also found in the grandma requests, dated, is it dated March 2021? And that was, all of these documents came out in March, or these emails were sent in March, right after the legislative audit, as to discuss how they were going to respond to the audit, how they could frame it and make it look like they were doing what the legislators wanted them to, what the legislation requires, without actually having to change our plan. And we need to be following what the legislation has requires of us, instead of trying to fit the legislation to our plan. We need to fit our plan to the legislation in order to be in compliance. And that is why I wrote my resolution to revoke Portrait of a Graduate, because as you'll see from Debbie Davis's explanation, it is a huge stretch to say that it complies with the legislative intent. That's all I have to say.
I don't very often speak on this, but I am going to do a clarification that there was some convolution there, that between strategic plans and Portrait of a Graduate. And I think speaking for Debbie Davis is very dangerous, and because of the content of that. I'm going to go to Chair Huntsman.
Yes, I there's quite a few hands raised. I just want to speak to.
They've all spoken before, Chair.
Okay. I just want to, well, I'm going to play off Member Hutchings' part of her closing comments. Not everyone chooses what's on the agenda, but when there's a motion on the floor and a second, we have a choice whether we like it's there or not, and this body will be measured based on the actions of the choice that you make as individual board members. So I've seen a lot of people regret when they abstain and that, but I think Member Hutchings covered it very well, and I concur with that. I have the same passion as Member Booth in the same place, and I think it's warranted. I mean, it's on the floor. I have a choice. I either say yes or I'll say no, but I'm in favor of saying yes. Now, I agree that it didn't have to be here, but it is before us. And I've watched the legislature and other bodies put resolutions forward, and I've asked legislators, did you really support that resolution with the Utah Jazz? I mean, but that was kind of fun and it was kind of light and etc. This is not fun and light. This is serious right here, and there's a lot of stakeholders that are engaged in this work of Portrait of the Graduate. So I'm in favor, and then I also invite people to either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
Okay, just a reminder, we've now spent over an hour on this topic. If you have something that because everyone has had opportunity to speak to this who wants to, I'm not going to deny you, but I just want you to know that we're rehashing the same things over and over again. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, based on some board members' comments, this is being used as a political vehicle in place of setting things in order. Am I hearing that right? If you disagree with this, then in other words, it's a political mechanism for, disagreeing with the resolution is not disagreeing with the components of the Portrait of a Graduate. And I want to be clear about that. So, because I don't disagree with the components of the Portrait of a Graduate. So if I don't agree with the resolution, then that would not be in opposition to the components of the Portrait of a Graduate.
Thank you.
I had one more thought and I didn't write it down. So I just want to be clear about that, unless this is being used as some kind of a political vehicle, and I'm hoping that's not the case.
Thank you. Board Member Hart?
Yeah, this is exactly why this conversation shouldn't have ended up here. If we needed to have a conversation about the Portrait of a Graduate, it needed to be in a roundtable where we could talk about this. But since it's been talked about, and now we have information about, a smoking gun memo, I just think I need to go on record as saying I've read that memo several times, and I very much disagree with the conclusions drawn. I don't believe that is an accurate representation, and I just feel that is the beauty of democracy, that people can disagree. And I also think it's the truth of education that you can look at something and see something completely different. I don't think, however, that an abstention puts you on the wrong side of history or that is a clear representation of my position. I fully, with all of my professional and board related energy, support Portrait of a Graduate. I've seen it in action, and it turns students' lives around, and it provides some structure for teachers and other educators and parents to all speak the same language. However, I don't believe that a resolution should be made because, quite frankly, I don't think it deserves to be hashed over in this form and fashion. I will always support and be willing to talk to anybody about why I support it, but talking about it right now in this forum in this way is, I think, irresponsible. So I will continue to abstain from participating in this vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hart. Board Member Moss?
I'll just echo Member Hart. The part as I have reviewed this that I objected to was the paragraph of recent attacks, which then go into a factual dispute. If this were a simple, unifying, positive endorsement of the Portrait of a Graduate, I'd be all over it. But the choice has been made to engage in a political dispute and to try to get all members behind that. I won't, so I'm going to abstain.
Thank you, Board Member Moss. Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. I'd like to call the previous question.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other hands up, but I am going to go ahead and take that as a motion on the floor. Do I have a second to that?
Second, Board Member Booth.
Second, Board Member Booth. Please vote to call the question. I think Board Member Hymas is somewhere else. Okay. All right, so we have 2 no votes, Board Member Hanson and Board Member Davis. Okay, so we're going to call the previous question is, the motion before the board is that the board, let me find it now, is that the board approves the resolution to support the Portrait of a Graduate. I'm going to do a roll call vote. And Board Member Booth.
Yes.
Board Member Cannon.
Yes.
Board Member Klein.
No.
Board Member Davis.
Yes.
Board Member Earl.
I'm abstaining.
Board Member Hanson.
Enthusiastically vote yes.
Board Member Hart.
While I support the Portrait of a Graduate, I abstain from this vote on a resolution.
Thank you. Chair Huntsman.
Yes.
Board Member Hutchings.
Absolutely, yes.
Board Member Hymas.
I support Portrait of a Graduate. I do not support the resolution. No.
Thank you. Board Member Lear.
Yes.
Board Member Moss.
Abstain.
Board Member Norton.
Yes.
Board Member Straight.
Yes.
That passes. Thank you. Okay, I will turn the helm over to Vice Chair Davis happily, readily, and gratefully. So, Vice Chair Davis, it's yours to take.
Point of order, Chair, you did a great job.
Oh, 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.